She stepped into the boutique with hesitation, her shoes worn thin from years of walking more than she could afford to drive. The entrance chimed softly behind her, but the sound barely masked the laughter coming from behind a marble counter. Dressed in a faded coat 2 sizes too big and clearly repaired at home, she walked past glittering displays of silk scarves, gold-trimmed handbags, and shoes that cost more than her monthly rent. One of the clerks, a tall woman with sharp heels and sharper eyes, gave her a once-over and then smirked at her coworker. "You lost, honey." The tone was not curious, it was cruel. Around them, the boutique shimmered in warm lighting, showcasing elegance and wealth in every square inch. Designed for the elite, this place was not used to walk-ins like her. But Marlene Reyes had not walked in to browse. She had walked in to buy. Her fingers trembled slightly as she pulled a folded sheet of paper from her coat pocket, creased at the corners, nearly torn at the fold, a printout of a purse her daughter had once circled in a magazine. It was extravagant, out of reach, and exactly what her daughter deserved. After years of scrubbing floors and folding laundry in strangers' homes, Marlene had finally saved enough. Not easily, not quickly, but through patience and grit, setting aside coins in a worn jar taped beneath the sink. Her daughter, Eva, had never asked for it. She never asked for anything. But this gift, this one symbol of pride and celebration for her upcoming scholarship to university, was going to be perfect. Marlene approached the counter slowly. The clerk, whose name tag read Clarissa, rolled her eyes. "Can I help you?" Her voice said otherwise. Marlene smiled gently. "I'm looking for the Gabriel Classic Tote, the one with the hand-stitched leather in crimson." Clarissa blinked, then laughed under her breath. "That purse? It starts at $23,000. She said it slowly, like explaining the concept of gravity to someone unfamiliar with standing upright. Marlene nodded once. "Yes, that is the one." Clarissa tilted her head. "Do you have an appointment?" Marlene looked around at the nearly empty boutique. Only 2 other customers were there, sipping mineral water and trying on scarves. "I did not know I needed one. I just wanted to see it." Clarissa sighed and glanced at her coworker, who covered her mouth to stifle a laugh. "We do not usually take walk-ins for limited editions. You can look, but we do not take those out of the case unless you are a serious buyer." Marlene's eyes softened, but her voice stayed even. "I have the money. I would like to see it." Clarissa's mouth twitched. "Of course, right this way." She gestured dramatically toward the far end of the boutique, where the purse in question sat illuminated in a glass enclosure. They approached it together, Marlene admiring it with quiet awe. Clarissa leaned toward the glass, then looked Marlene up and down. "That is a big investment," she said pointedly. "Most people who can afford this do not come in wearing hand-me-downs." Marlene said nothing. She had heard worse. She had survived worse. But still, something about the way the woman stood there, amused and disbelieving, lit a small fire in her chest. "I would still like to purchase it," she said. Her voice was steady. Clarissa blinked. "You are serious? I mean, do you want to see the price tag again?" Marlene reached into her coat, pulled out a small, carefully folded envelope, and placed it on the counter. Inside was the full amount, in neat cashier's checks and cash. Clarissa's smirk faltered for just a second, then returned. "That is highly irregular. We do not usually accept large cash transactions without verification. I will have to speak to the manager." As she turned, she muttered something under her breath. Marlene could not make it out, but the word "ridiculous" floated by. The coworker at the front was now giggling outright, her hand barely covering her mouth as she stared. Customers nearby began to take notice. Marlene stood her ground, eyes on the purse. It was beautiful, a shade of red that reminded her of Eva's favorite sweater, stitched with grace and confidence. Everything she wanted her daughter to feel every time she carried it. A few moments later, Clarissa returned, this time with a man in a tight-fitting suit and glossy black shoes. He looked between Clarissa and Marlene and forced a polite smile. "Good afternoon. I am Terrence, the assistant floor manager. I hear you are interested in one of our high-tier selections." Marlene nodded. "I am ready to purchase it today." Terrence's smile did not reach his eyes. "That is wonderful to hear. Unfortunately, we are extremely cautious with luxury inventory." He glanced at the envelope Clarissa had left on the counter. It appears you are attempting to make a large purchase with unverified cash, which violates our store policy. We could, however, take your information down, and if you can provide appropriate references or a bank statement, we might be able to proceed within 5 to 7 business days. Marlene frowned slightly. My daughter's celebration is this weekend. I came here because your website said you had this in stock, and I wanted to surprise her. Terrence shrugged. We do have it in stock, madam, but we are not a convenience store. With that, he gave a stiff nod and turned away. Clarissa was not so polite. She let out a sharp breath that was almost a laugh. Look, maybe try the outlet stores across the street. You might find something more attainable. The other clerk chuckled again, and even one of the scarf-wearing customers gave a snide look. Marlene felt the heat crawl up her neck, not because she doubted herself, but because they did. Because no matter what she had gone through to get here, no matter how hard she worked or how decent she tried to be, she was still being seen as less, not worthy, and that, more than anything, stung. But then, a new voice cut through the tension, a quiet voice, curious, not commanding. Is there a problem here? All heads turned. From the private fitting room emerged a tall woman in her 60s, wearing a tailored beige coat and a silk scarf tied effortlessly around her neck. Her shoes were polished but simple. Her eyes, though, were sharp and alert. Clarissa immediately straightened. Miss Eleanor, I did not know you were here today. Terrence returned hastily, all faux confidence gone. Miss Eleanor, what a surprise. The woman looked at them both, then turned her gaze to Marlene. She studied her, not with judgment, but with interest. I saw the security feed in the back, she said, and I would like to hear from this lady herself. What were you looking for today? Marlene felt a surge of nervousness, but also relief. I was hoping to purchase the Gabrielle Classic Tote. For my daughter, she is the first in our family to go to university, and I wanted to give her something lasting. Eleanor nodded slowly, her eyes softening. Did they tell you the price? Yes. I brought enough, but they would not allow it. I understand. Eleanor looked at Terrence, then Clarissa. I would like you both to excuse yourselves for the afternoon. There was a pause. Terrence stammered. Miss Eleanor, I assure you, this is my boutique, Eleanor interrupted, and I will not have people in my store who treat paying customers like intrusions. Clarissa opened her mouth to protest, but one look from Eleanor silenced her. Terrence nodded stiffly and walked away. Clarissa followed, cheeks burning. With the boutique now noticeably quieter, Eleanor turned her full attention back to Marlene. There was a kind of calm in her presence, not cold or distant, but composed and unwavering. She reached out and gently took the envelope from the counter, scanning its contents without a word. Then she looked up and met Marlene's eyes. This is more than enough, she said, and neatly arranged. May I ask, how long have you been saving for this? Marlene hesitated before answering. Years. I started when Ava was 14. She was reading a fashion magazine someone had left on the bus. She pointed to that bag and said, one day I will walk into that store and buy it myself. Marlene gave a small smile, but I wanted her to have it before she ever had to prove anything. Eleanor listened, without interrupting. Her fingers lightly traced the edge of the glass case, the purse inside glowing under the soft lights. That is the kind of love that cannot be measured, she said quietly, and certainly not by price tags or appearances. She turned to one of the remaining clerks, a young woman who had been silent through the entire ordeal. Could you please bring out the Gabrielle tote? The young woman nodded quickly, rushing to the back to retrieve the item. Marlene stood still, not daring to believe this was really happening. Eleanor walked around the counter and stood beside her, her tone lower now, more personal. I started this store 28 years ago. Back then, it was nothing more than a 2-room boutique with borrowed inventory and a lot of prayers. The luxury came later, but the dignity, that was always meant to be here. She paused, her expression firm. Somewhere along the way, some of my staff forgot that, and I let them, but no more. Marlene blinked away the sting of tears that threatened to rise, not from sadness, but from recognition, the feeling of finally being seen after so many years of being invisible. The young clerk returned, carrying the crimson leather tote with reverent care. It looked even more beautiful up close, the stitching flawless, the craftsmanship evident in every detail. Eleanor took it gently and placed it in Marlene's hands. "You said your daughter's name is Eva?" "Yes." "Then Eva is going to receive something far more valuable than a designer purse. She is going to receive a story, one she will carry with her long after this bag fades. She will know that her mother walked into a place that tried to make her feel small and still stood tall, that she never needed to beg for dignity, only to claim it." Marlene held the purse as if it might vanish, as if it were too precious to be real. But more than that, she stood straighter now. The weight of shame she had entered with was gone, replaced by something quieter and stronger. "Thank you," she whispered. "I do not know what to say." Eleanor smiled softly. "You already said everything that mattered. The payment was processed without delay. No more questions, no more conditions." Eleanor personally walked her to the door, her hand resting lightly on Marlene's shoulder. As they reached the threshold, Eleanor paused. "May I ask, would you and your daughter be willing to join me for tea sometime? I think I could learn a great deal from you both." Marlene looked at her, stunned. "I would be honored." They exchanged contact information, and with that, Marlene stepped back into the world, holding her daughter's future gift with both hands and a heart no longer burdened by doubt. As the door closed behind her, Eleanor stood for a moment in silence. Then she turned and called for a full staff meeting. Within 15 minutes, the sales floor was cleared. Staff gathered, awkward and uncertain. Eleanor stood at the center, no raised voice, no theatrics, just clarity. What happened today is not an isolated incident. It is a pattern, and that pattern ends now. We are not gatekeepers. We are not judges of worth. We are here to serve with grace and respect. I built this brand on the belief that luxury should feel welcoming, not weaponized. And if anyone cannot understand that, they do not belong here. Several heads bowed, a few eyes darted nervously. One clerk excused herself and did not return. Eleanor did not chase her. That evening, she sat in her office long after closing, reviewing customer feedback forms and scheduling a training session with a consultant who specialized in unconscious bias and retail ethics. She knew there would be more to do, but this was where it started, not with a policy memo or a staff reshuffle, but with a woman who walked in wearing patched shoes and left having shifted the soul of the place. The weekend arrived, and with it came the celebration that Marlene had waited years to see. The community center had been modestly decorated with paper banners and handmade flowers, courtesy of neighbors and friends who had watched Eva grow up. Plastic chairs lined the walls, dishes were brought from home. Children chased each other between tables while adults exchanged stories about long shifts and short breaks. Marlene stood at the front in a simple dress, her hair pulled back, watching as Eva greeted guests with a radiant smile. She had been offered a full scholarship to study biomedical sciences, a dream that seemed impossible just a few years before. Marlene clutched the wrapped gift in her hands, heart pounding not from nerves, but from the weight of the moment. When Eva finally joined her, cheeks flushed with laughter and movement, Marlene handed her the package with trembling hands. "What is this?" Eva asked, smiling. "Just something I hope you will carry with you," Marlene said softly. Eva opened the box and gasped. The boutique's crimson purse, polished and precise, sat nestled in white tissue. Her hands covered her mouth, her eyes wide with disbelief. "Mom, number—" "You did not." Marlene nodded slowly. "I did, because you have earned more than just a place at that university. You have earned the right to walk into any room and know you belong." Eva threw her arms around her mother, holding her tightly. "But how? Where? I thought we agreed it was too much." Marlene smiled into her daughter's hair. "It turns out some people still believe in stories that matter more than labels, and that sometimes being underestimated is the best way to be seen." Word of what happened at the boutique spread slowly at first. A clerk mentioned it at a gathering. Someone else posted a vague comment on social media. But within a week, a small lifestyle blog picked up the story. The headline read, "Luxury store owner defends humble customer and sparks industry-wide conversation." It included a picture of Eleanor in her boutique, standing beside a display with a quote written in gold across the wall, "Dignity is not a price point." The article gained traction, shared and reposted by fashion insiders and human rights activists alike. Other boutiques began fielding questions. Do you require appointments to view certain items? What are your policies on customer dress code? Eleanor received dozens of emails, many from boutique owners asking how she had handled the backlash, but there had not been one, not in the way they feared. Instead, foot traffic increased, and with it came a wave of customers who had never dared to walk into places like hers. Elderly women with pensions, young students saving up for their first designer piece, single mothers with their daughters, holding hands and looking into cases they had only seen through windows. Eleanor greeted each one herself, not out of duty, but because she believed they had just as much right to be there as anyone else. Her sales team changed too. Clarissa never returned. Terrence submitted his resignation 2 weeks later, citing philosophical differences. Eleanor did not fight it. She knew that real change required discomfort. But Daniel, the young clerk who had quietly watched it all unfold, remained. And in time, he became one of the boutique's most trusted managers. He started a mentorship program within the store, training new employees on not just product knowledge, but human empathy. He spoke often of a woman named Marlene who had walked in carrying only courage and love and walked out carrying something far more powerful. Back at the boutique, Eleanor added a small wooden plaque beneath the purse display where the Gabriel tote had once sat. It read, "In honor of the woman who reminded us who we are here to serve." Every morning, before opening the doors, she paused in front of it, not out of habit, but out of respect. Because that story was not just a customer service anecdote. It was a turning point, a reckoning, and a promise to never let profit come before principle again. One day, a letter arrived at the boutique. It was handwritten, addressed in neat cursive. Inside was a photograph of Eva standing in front of her new dorm, the crimson purse on her shoulder, her smile bright and wide. The note was simple. She walks with pride, and she carries you with her. Thank you for making space for her in a world that so often forgets to. Eleanor kept the letter in her desk drawer, reading it whenever doubt tried to creep in. It reminded her that some of the most valuable investments are made in people, not products. Months passed, and the boutique, once known quietly among the elite, had developed a new reputation, not just for rare items or high-end exclusives, but for being a place where people of all backgrounds felt welcome. Reviews on fashion forums took note of the transformation, with phrases like shockingly kind service, respectful without pretense, and the first boutique where I didn't feel judged appearing over and over. Eleanor read these carefully, knowing they were more than compliments. They were confirmation. But even as the world outside was beginning to shift, Marlene's world remained much the same. She still cleaned homes on weekdays. She still clipped coupons. She still walked when she could not justify the fare. But her steps felt different now, anchored by a quiet pride. She had given her daughter something beautiful, yes, but she had also given her the knowledge that their story mattered, that they could walk into any room, not hoping for acceptance, but expecting respect. One afternoon, while waiting for the laundry to finish at the corner laundromat, Marlene was approached by a woman she did not recognize. She was well-dressed but warm, her eyes kind. "Excuse me, are you Marlene Reyes?" Marlene nodded slowly. "Yes, I am." The woman smiled wider. "I hope this isn't strange, but I read about you. The boutique, the purse, your daughter. I just wanted to say thank you." Marlene blinked, caught off guard. "Thank you for what?" "For reminding people like me that we aren't alone. That dignity doesn't come with a price tag. I took my teenage daughter to that boutique last month. She's been struggling with confidence, with feeling like she doesn't belong anywhere. But when we walked in, we were greeted like we mattered, and she saw herself differently that day." Marlene felt a lump rise in her throat. I'm glad." The woman hesitated, then added, "You changed more than one life, Miss Reyes, and I hope you know that." Marlene watched her walk away, her laundry spinning behind her, the hum of dryers filling the room. She sat down slowly and stared at the floor for a long moment. The story had traveled farther than she imagined, and not just through headlines or photographs, but through ripples, through the quiet shift in how people treated one another, through a boutique that used to whisper exclusivity and now spoke loudly of inclusion. That evening, Marlene wrote a letter. It was not meant for the press or the public. It was addressed to Eleanor. In neat script, she thanked her again, not just for the purse, but for the lesson. She told her about the woman at the laundromat. She told her about Eva's first month at the university, how she was already volunteering as a mentor for younger students. She told her how proud she was to know that sometimes one decision made on a quiet afternoon in a store could reshape how a girl sees herself and how the world sees her. Eleanor read the letter over a cup of tea, alone in her study. She folded it carefully and placed it beside Eva's dorm photo in the same drawer. Then, almost without thinking, she picked up her phone and called Daniel. "I think it's time," she said. "For what?" he asked. "For something bigger." The next month, Eleanor launched the Reyes Initiative, named quietly in Marlene's honor. It was a store-wide policy shift, but also a training movement, focusing on creating inclusive customer experiences in high-end retail spaces. No more silent judgments, no more assumptions based on clothing or speech, and no more mistaking wealth for worth. She offered to partner with other retailers, even those who had once scoffed at her methods. Some declined, but others signed on immediately. Soon, what had started as a scandal whispered through city salons became a citywide campaign. Workshops were held. Sales staff were trained in empathy, dignity, and quiet attentiveness. And through it all, Marlene's story, without her ever seeking attention, became the example that others studied. Eva, meanwhile, continued to excel. She sent regular updates to her mother, stories of late-night study sessions and campus activism. In one message, she attached a photo of herself holding a science award and wearing the crimson purse over her shoulder. Her caption was short: "Every time I walk into a room, I carry you with me." Marlene printed it and taped it to the refrigerator. On particularly hard days, when her body ached and her mind was heavy, she would pause there and reread it. Because while the purse had been the gift, the real legacy was what it represented: a mother's love, a stranger's intervention, and a world that, at least in one corner, had chosen to become a little more human. Eleanor would sometimes visit the store quietly on her days off, watching from the edge as a new kind of customer walked through the doors, one who had never been made to feel they belonged anywhere, and she would smile, knowing the boutique had finally become what she always meant for it to be. The next spring brought with it a charity gala unlike anything the city had seen before. Hosted at the Metropolitan Hall, a venue typically reserved for elite political fundraisers and exclusive fashion events, the event was put together under the banner of the Reyes Initiative. But it was not just the name that made people take notice, it was the guest list. Alongside designers and philanthropists were schoolteachers, sanitation workers, single parents, and scholarship students. Eleanor had insisted that the gala reflect the values they were trying to promote, that everyone deserved a seat at the table, and she meant it literally. No VIP section, no roped-off areas, just long communal tables adorned with fresh flowers, handwritten menus, and local musicians playing classical and folk music side by side. Marlene arrived wearing a borrowed dress from a neighbor and shoes Eva had mailed home from campus, insisting her mother wear something comfortable and elegant. As she entered the hall, she paused, overwhelmed by the grandeur but even more by the warmth. No one looked at her like she was in the wrong place. No one whispered. No one judged. In fact, people smiled, welcomed her, introduced themselves. She found herself seated next to a pediatric surgeon on one side and a high school librarian on the other. Across the table was a woman who ran a community kitchen. They talked about everything except money. Marlene listened more than she spoke, but when she did, people leaned in. She had that quiet gravity, the kind that came from surviving storms without ever losing your softness. Toward the end of the evening, Eleanor took the stage. Her speech was short. She talked about how luxury had to grow up, about how elegance without empathy was just arrogance in silk. She ended with a tribute. "There is someone here tonight who changed the direction of my life and the life of this boutique." She walked in carrying a quiet purpose, and walked out leaving a message that none of us should forget. "Marlene Reyes, would you join me?" The room applauded, not politely, but deeply, sincerely. Marlene stood slowly, unsure at first, but the applause did not fade. It only grew stronger as she made her way to the stage. When she reached Eleanor, the older woman took both her hands and said into the microphone, "This woman reminded us that integrity does not wear a label, and neither should compassion. Marlene did not make a speech. She did not need to. Her presence was the message. The next day, photos from the gala spread quickly. One in particular, of Marlene and Eleanor standing together, hands clasped, eyes level, was shared across social media with the caption, "When luxury remembers its soul." The boutique saw another wave of visitors, not for the handbags, but for what they symbolized. The Gabrielle Classic Tote, now permanently renamed the Reyes Edition, sold out within weeks, not because of marketing, but because of meaning. Each one included a small tag stitched into the inner lining. Walk with dignity. Eva, back on campus, was invited to speak at a women's leadership conference. She opened her speech by saying, "I'm here not because I climbed the mountain, but because my mother carved the path with her bare hands." The audience gave her a standing ovation. One woman approached her afterward in tears, saying, "I wish someone had told me when I was your age that it was okay to come from little and dream of more. You said what I needed to hear." Meanwhile, back in their neighborhood, Marlene's life did not suddenly become one of glamour or wealth. She still worked, still walked, still saved, but she was no longer invisible. Children at the local park would wave when they saw her. A corner bakery began leaving out a small box of pastries every Friday with her name on it, already paid for by someone anonymous. People began asking for her opinion on things, on how to make spaces more welcoming, on how to handle community disputes, on how to build trust where it had been broken. And she answered honestly, gently, without ever pretending to be more than what she was, a mother who wanted better for her child and who believed everyone deserved to be treated with basic decency. Eleanor visited Marlene once every few weeks, sometimes for tea, sometimes just to sit in silence. They were different in many ways, Eleanor with her decades in business, Marlene with her years of survival. But there was a bond that had formed, unshakable and real. One afternoon, Eleanor said something that stayed with Marlene long after. The world likes to put people into categories, buyer or beggar, donor or recipient, leader or follower. But you reminded me that we are all just human beings waiting for someone to see us. Marlene nodded quietly, and sometimes all it takes is to walk in and not walk away, even when they want you to. Eleanor reached across the table and squeezed her hand, especially then. That fall, the Reyes Initiative expanded to 4 more cities, with partnerships forming between boutiques, social workers, and local schools. They developed workshops not just for retail staff but for students, teaching confidence and communication to teenagers who had never been inside a luxury store before. And everywhere the program went, they told the story of Marlene, not with pomp, not with pity, but with reverence, for the strength it takes to stay kind in a world that is often anything but. Because when one woman stands her ground with grace, she becomes a lighthouse for others to find their way. The summer following the gala marked the beginning of something deeper than a movement. It became a quiet but powerful reckoning. Luxury was no longer just defined by exclusivity or price. It began to be redefined by intentionality, by the choice to treat people with honor. Eleanor, now semi-retired, spent her days consulting for small boutique owners who wanted to follow the Reyes model. She spoke at gatherings, not in grand auditoriums, but in small circles, back rooms, community centers, local business collectives. She would roll out case studies, not of profits and margins, but of individuals like Marlene, whose treatment had shifted an entire philosophy. In one session, a young business owner from Chicago raised her hand and asked, "What if we offer kindness and it is not returned? What if we treat people with dignity and they still reject us?" Eleanor paused before answering. "Then you do it again anyway, because integrity is not transactional, and the right to be respected does not depend on gratitude." In another corner of the country, Eva was now speaking at a global conference on medical equity. She stood on stage with a quiet confidence that could not be taught in any classroom. Her research had earned her a special grant to build modular prosthetics for underfunded clinics. But when asked about the origin of her work, she said, "I owe every innovation to my mother. She is the one who taught me that access is not about generosity. It is about justice." Back home, Marlene had become a fixture in her community, not as a celebrity, not even as a leader in any official sense, but as a person people trusted. Young mothers came to her for advice. Teenagers confided in her. Elderly neighbors left extra fruit on her doorstep. When the library down the street faced budget cuts, it was Marlene who organized the first fundraiser, calling in help from the Reyes Initiative and gathering enough donations to not only save the library, but to expand its community programs. On the day of the reopening, the librarian handed her a small box. Inside was a library card holder made of soft red leather, embossed with her initials. Marlene blinked back tears. "You remembered." The librarian nodded. "We remember everything, Miss Reyes, especially the ones who make us feel like we matter." That evening, Marlene sat alone on her porch, the sun dipping low behind the rooftops. The air was warm, cicadas buzzing lazily, and in the distance she could hear a child's laughter. It reminded her of Eva, once small and wide-eyed, asking if people like them were ever allowed in stores like the ones they passed downtown. And now that very store had built its legacy around her name. She reached for the newspaper still sitting beside her. The headline read, "From Exclusion to Empathy: How One Woman Redefined Retail." The article chronicled the evolution of the Reyes Initiative, now operating in over 100 cities. The writer had called her a catalyst, a figure of change. But as she read, Marlene could only think of the moment she stood silently in front of that glass case, envelope in hand, being told, without words and then with them, that she did not belong. It had not felt powerful. It had felt humiliating. But it was that humiliation, that dismissal, that became the spark. Because she had stayed. She had not walked out angry. She had walked out resolved. And she had returned the next day. Not with vengeance, but with love. That was the real revolution. Not that she had bought the purse, but that she had never let go of her own dignity in the process. Eleanor often told people that Marlene taught her what quiet power looked like, but Marlene always insisted she had simply done what needed to be done, that she had not intended to make a statement. She had only wanted to give her daughter something beautiful, and in doing so, she had given an entire industry something far more rare than wealth: perspective. In the years that followed, the boutique continued to thrive, but no longer as an enclave of the elite. It became a symbol of aspiration rooted in kindness. Couples on their anniversaries came in dressed however they pleased. Grandmothers brought their granddaughters to try on their first pair of heels. And each new customer was told, not with pomp, but with sincerity, "You are welcome here." Always. The plaque that once sat beneath the purse display was now a wall-sized installation. "To the woman who taught us that dignity cannot be priced." And just below it, etched into the stone in smaller letters, Marlene Reyes walked in with love, and walked out having changed the way we see the world. Marlene never returned to the boutique with ceremony. She did visit once every couple of years, slipping in quietly, usually to buy a small gift for Eva or a neighbor. The staff never fawned over her, but every single one knew who she was, and every single one stood a little taller when they saw her, knowing that the reason they were trained to look people in the eye and greet them with warmth had started with her. In time, the Reyes Initiative began offering grants, not just for boutique ethics training, but for low-income entrepreneurs starting their own customer-facing businesses. Barbershops, bakeries, bookstores, any place where people gathered and stories could be honored, and every grant recipient received a note, signed simply, "Let kindness be the first thing they notice." That was the legacy, not in logos or branding, but in the way someone felt when they stepped through a door. Marlene never claimed to be extraordinary, but in refusing to shrink, in refusing to lower her gaze or her expectations, she had become a mirror, one that forced an entire system to take a long, hard look at itself. And it changed, not overnight, not everywhere, but it changed. And for every person who had ever been laughed out of a place they could afford to walk into, for every daughter who would grow up knowing she deserved to be seen, and for every store that now taught dignity as part of the job, Marlene's story lived on. It had been 10 years since Marlene Reyes first walked into that boutique, 10 years since she was told in so many cutting ways that she did not belong, and 10 years since a quiet woman in patched shoes had made the world take notice, not because she shouted, but because she stood firm. That anniversary was not marked by headlines. There was no ceremony, no gala, no photo shoot. Instead, it was marked in the smallest, most beautiful way imaginable, by a handwritten letter. It arrived on a Thursday afternoon, slipped through the mail slot, and landing quietly on Marlene's kitchen floor. The envelope was cream-colored, the ink neat. Inside, the letter read, "Dear Miss Reyes, I am writing to thank you for something you probably do not even remember. I was 17 when my mother and I came into the boutique. She was nervous. She clutched her purse tightly the whole time, afraid we would be asked to leave. But we were not. We were greeted with kindness. I saw the plaque on the wall and asked who you were. The clerk said, 'She is the reason we all do this differently now.' I never forgot that. This year, I received a scholarship to study interior design. My mother and I celebrated by buying our first shared handbag. Not because we needed it, but because we could. Thank you for giving us that moment. We will carry it for the rest of our lives." It was signed only with a first name, Isabel. Marlene sat at her table for a long time with the letter open in front of her, one hand resting on the page. The hum of the refrigerator and the faint buzz of the city outside were the only sounds, but in her heart there was something louder than silence. It was peace, not the kind of peace that came from success or security, but the kind that came from knowing that something you did, simply by refusing to be small, had made the world a little softer for someone else. Later that week, Marlene went for a walk down the main avenue. She passed the bakery that now had 3 locations, all of which displayed a small Reyes certified sign in their window, a designation given by the initiative to businesses that upheld inclusive, dignified customer service standards. She stopped by the library, now with a brand new children's wing funded entirely by community donations. A poster on the door announced a story hour titled "Little Acts, Big Change," a nod to the transformation sparked years ago by a single visit to a luxury store. She continued walking until she reached a building she had not visited in a long time. It had changed on the outside, sleeker signage, larger windows, but inside it was still unmistakably the same boutique. The moment she entered, the same gentle chime rang through the air. A clerk near the entrance looked up and smiled. There was no flash of recognition in her eyes, just genuine welcome. "Hello," she said warmly. "Please let me know if there's anything I can help you with today." Marlene smiled. "I'm just browsing, thank you." She wandered past the glass displays, the rows of elegant items arranged like museum pieces. And there it was, the crimson tote, no longer kept behind glass, no longer rare because of scarcity, but now because of what it meant. She stepped closer. A small sign rested beside it. "This is not just a bag. This is a story. This is the proof that dignity walks in every day, often unnoticed." We noticed. We still do. Marlene touched the edge of the shelf gently. She did not need to buy anything today. She had already carried more than enough. On her way out, the young clerk called out, "Have a wonderful afternoon." "You too," Marlene replied. She stepped outside and let the sun warm her face. That moment, unremarkable to anyone else, was everything. Not because she had walked into a luxury boutique, but because now anyone could, and be treated not as an inconvenience, not as an oddity, but as a human being. As the years continued, Marlene never grew used to being called a changemaker or a trailblazer. She always brushed it off, saying, "I just wanted to buy a gift for my daughter." But in every corner of the country, her story was whispered to new employees, shared in training sessions, printed in brochures about how to build trust in modern retail. The Reyes model became a case study at business schools, and more importantly, it became a quiet revolution in daily life. In stores where clerks once assessed clients by their shoes, people were now trained to listen first, to greet with warmth, not suspicion, to assume value, not question it. And behind every shift, whether recognized or not, was the legacy of that moment, of one woman walking in without apology and standing tall despite the cold air around her. One winter, a young woman named Clara stood in front of her own boutique's new hires. She was barely 30, the owner of 2 locations and counting. She held up a photo of Marlene, the one taken at the 10-year gala, where she stood in front of the plaque with Eleanor. "This," Clara said, "is the reason our doors are open to everyone. This is the standard, not just how we display product, but how we display decency." Marlene Reyes changed the world by walking in and refusing to walk out. And every time we greet someone with warmth, we keep her story going. That same night, Marlene sat with Eva on their porch, sipping warm tea under a starry sky. Eva, now married and working as a lead designer at a nonprofit clinic, had brought her son, Marlene's grandson, to visit. He slept inside, curled in blankets and soft lullabies. Eva leaned her head against her mother's shoulder. "Do you ever think about that day?" she asked. "The day in the store?" Marlene smiled softly. "I think about it less than you might believe. It was only one day, but what came after, that I think about all the time." Eva nodded. "It still amazes me how much changed because of one afternoon." Marlene looked at the stars, her voice calm and certain. "Change is always waiting for someone to walk in first. I just happened to be the one holding the door." And with that, they sat in silence. A mother and daughter, a legacy and its future. And in the hush of the evening, surrounded by the echo of stories now told in boutiques, in schools, in boardrooms and kitchens, one truth remained more luminous than any star above them. True elegance lives in how we treat each other when no one expects us to. As the porch light flickered gently behind them, Marlene turned her gaze toward the quiet street. Somewhere, she knew, another woman was stepping through a doorway just like she had all those years ago. Maybe her clothes were worn, maybe her hands trembled, but maybe, just maybe, she would not be turned away. Maybe she would be greeted with a smile, offered a seat, asked how she could be helped, not judged, not dismissed. That was the real gift. Not a purse, not a plaque, but the knowledge that every time one person dared to see another fully, a crack of light opened in the world, and through that crack, possibility could bloom. As the stars blinked above and the night wrapped around them, Marlene took a slow breath. She had not set out to teach anyone a lesson. She had only wanted her daughter to feel seen, and in the end, it was the whole world that learned how to see.